Welcome to the Food Startups Podcast.
Hey guys, welcome to the Food Startups Podcast. You're here with Danny and Matt. I'm back in Medellin after a trip to the countryside. And Matt, where are you at?
I'm here in Bogota, Danny. Today we are on to our 11th episode, so we seem to be on a good pace for 2014.
Yeah, 2014, I can smell it's going to be a really strong year. And today, what are we talking about? We're talking about some pretty intense and exciting stuff.
Yeah, and Danny, just before we get into this, I want to put the disclaimers out there. We think we have a very interesting topic today. We're not registered lawyers, nor are we government officials, but we think we see something where there is a opportunity for people to learn and save money and avoid paying really, really high fees to lawyers and other sorts of companies that do some very simple tasks.
Yes, and we here at the Food Startups Podcast are all about making sure you guys, when you're starting out, are not throwing away and losing money, because the food business is a hard one to get into.
That's right, Danny. And if you can save money because the startup costs are always so high, this might be a place to start. And the idea of today's podcast is that for facilities, manufacturers or whatever type of company that ships food from another country, they need to register their facility with the FDA.
Yes. And so that process gets a little bit murky in the sense that you have this agent that's supposed to register, right? And so we're going to talk about that today in just a sec. I'm going to throw out the name of the episode that I threw out earlier, and it's going to go like this. How do I register a food facility with the FDA without price gouging ingrates taking my money to the bank? So we'll try to keep it within that scope.
That sounds good, right? So we're not covering everything about having, your food registered. We're just talking about the registration process, to get started, right? For first-time exporters or even importers, sometimes you'll need to help out the exporters, which I've done. And so we want to talk about something that stemmed from something in 2002 called the Bioterrorism Act. And basically what it did for the people in the food world is you have to register your facility online. And to do this registration, it takes a little bit of time. You need to register the facility. You need to set up a U.S. agent for correspondence. And then related to this, packaging, right? Making sure your labeling's right on your packaging. And also something called prior notice, which is basically creating a notification when you're going to send your food to the U.S.
Okay. Wait, Matt. So let's say I'm a food exporter in their home in South America, and I'm exporting to the States for the first time. Why do I need to know about this Bioterrorism Act? Isn't that for something like the CIA?
Well, I don't know everything about the Bioterrorism Act, but as it applies to food, it did change the way where they needed more information about people and facilities where food is being manufactured to be shipped to the U.S. Now, I'm sure there's tons and tons of legal and political stuff that is way beyond us. But yeah, what you need to know is it did change the way you have to register your facility to ship food products to the United States.
Interesting. So what that sounds like is that the FDA is trying to keep tabs on all the importers with all of the facilities around the world, right?
Well, I guess you would say exporters, right?
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, the people that are importing the products from the U.S., they need to know where the foods are coming from. Yes, so they're keeping more tabs on that type of information.
Got it. And let me just follow that up. The reason why I asked is just because it sounds like, when I think about it, I know there's no way that the FDA can keep track of every single facility by having site visits, by interviewing, by actually doing quality control. And that's up to manufacturers in the other country, and there are rules around that within each country. So what exactly would an agent do in this scenario?
Okay, so the way I understand it is is, an agent's kind of, registration is kind of like a registered agent that you have for an LLC, right? And to take a step back, what you basically need to do if you want to be ready and get your FDA food facility registration number, you need to go to their website. And don't worry, we're going to link all of this on the podcast page, at foodstartupspodcast.com. But for this episode, you just need to go to their website, you enter in the facility information, and, you talk about the types of foods you're interested in exporting, your name, address, the usual stuff. And then you get to another page, which allows you to classify who your U.S. agent is. And, you just put in the name and address and phone number of that person. And basically it's set up so that if for whatever reason the FDA needs to contact you about your foods, they're going to contact this person, usually by mail or by calling. They have to be able to receive correspondence. So does that make it a little bit more clear why we talk about the facility registration and the U.S. agent?
Definitely. And, it's interesting because there's something called the registered agents in United States of America. Well, they are a registered amount, but these guys are not like a registered entities. It sounds like anybody can actually work through the process themselves to actually receive that correspondence, right?
Right. And so we may be able to use something like a mail forwarding company. We're not sure about the rules behind there and what it really means. But I guess, the reason we're talking about this is something that may be shocking to guess is that I've come across, because I've registered, companies that I work with, in South America, but I've also seen that there's been government sponsored programs in kind of legal outfits out of Florida where they charge an absorbent fee for this one process, just a food facility registration U.S. agent, which we talked about is, 2 forms you can fill out online, that takes about, half an hour maximum. And they charge maybe, like $900 just to register the facility, and then another $600 annual fee for the U.S. agent. And, that's a lot of money to be spending for something that can be done in less than half an hour. And so, I think that's something, and you talked about earlier, Bioterrorism Act, FDA registration number. It sounds like, especially because in other countries, a lot of these registrations are a lot more difficult. Like at least in Colombia, these registrations are way more difficult. So they assume it's going to be as difficult as in their country, and it's not. And a lot of lawyers will take advantage of this. And, I've heard of lawyers charging a Colombian company in Cali like 7 million pesos for something so simple. Right?
Yeah, and that's really interesting that you mentioned that, Matt. I think I know in Colombia, one reason there are a lot of hurdles actually to importing, in the sense that there are pretty high fees for getting registered and having clearance to import. And so if there's an expectation within the company that you're doing business with the United States, then they're definitely expecting a whole nother hurdle to jump over that's going to cost thousands of dollars.
Right. And so because of that, in my mind, people are really taking advantage of that because it shouldn't be that expensive. Moving on, there is the food labeling, right? We've covered the facility registration, the U.S. agent. The next thing that's going to happen when a shipment comes in, they're going to look at the labeling of your product and make sure there's basic stuff like, did you put the country of origin? Did you put the net weight? The nutrition facts.
And these are some pretty, these are some really specific rules. So they can be really intimidating as well for any sort of startup because you face a grand risk when you bring your product into the States and it might not be accurately labeled.
Right. And so the next part, the FDA food labeling, there are lawyers that charge for reviewing labels. And to be fair, this is much more difficult and it sometimes could warrant the use of a lawyer. I mean, there is we'll link to it. The FDA has their own PDF document. It's about like 100 something pages that tells you how to do all this stuff. But I understand, if this is not your first language, or you want to be sure, there are, lawyers that can do it for about $1,000. They can review and do it for you, which still could be a bit high, but I do understand because it's not as straightforward as the first things we talked about, which are the food facility registration and the U.S. agent.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And Matt, I got to ask you your opinion on something. So I've seen that, and I've read different case studies where sometimes the FDA will slap you on the wrist if you do not adhere to some of these rules. Now, they differ in the sense that you do have to be right with some things, but if you were, let me just ask you a question. If you run a company that's between, let's say, 1 and 10 employees, are you going to keep this part in house, or are you going to try to shop it out? Just a personal question for you.
I mean, I personally would do it in-house, but it all depends on your budget and the time you have allotted for it.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, with food labeling, and there comes, very specific things like, can you say good source of fiber or high in vitamin A? There's all the requisites for that. And one thing that I've found that is most difficult is they say, you have to calculate it based on the recommended dietary allowance or recommended daily allowance. And the tough part with that is that the RDA all depends if you're like an adult or male or a female, right? So it's hard to know exactly which number to calculate it on, although I think most people do like the standard adult.
Absolutely. And I've even seen literature, and I've seen articles showing that actually the biggest companies in the United States, I won't name names, but cereal companies and various manufacturers really, they sometimes make claims about the high sources of protein or fiber that actually aren't really even, that are found to not be true. And I think, I do think that my take on it really quickly is that, if you work with a designer who's actually done some work in the States, they might be able to put you in touch with contacts that can advise on this. And if you've had 1 or 2 go-arounds, depending on the type of product, you might be able to do it in-house and get it right, So it all kind of depends on your appetite for risk and also your attention to detail and how confident you are in your company to get it right.
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement. Now, I'd say, moving on to the prior notice, right? This is the last thing. So, just to review, we've covered the food facility registration and the U.S. agent, which is very simple. That can be done, in less than half an hour. The food labeling guidelines, which are more difficult, may require the use of a lawyer. Either way, we can at least put the guide that the FDA publishes that lawyers are going to use anyway, so you can take a look at it. And then the fourth thing, this is when you're actually sending a shipment. You have to file something that's called a prior notice. And a prior notice, basically. And
Matt, let me interrupt you for just 1 second. And a prior notice, that's for any shipment coming into the United States from outside. You meaning if let's say you're exporting from Colombia, are you? I just want to make clear. Prior notice is for exporting only, or is it just for food labeling? What is it?
Okay, prior notice is for a shipment. So any food coming from outside of the U.S. that's coming in a shipment to the United States.
Gotcha. And so what's the step when you're managing the shipment, when you know that that some cargo is out and heading into the States? How are you going to manage prior notice?
So, you need to get the airway bill number, the tracking number, right? They call it the airway bill number. And you need to know how many boxes, the weight of each box and how many units are each box. And with that information, you can log on to the same FDA system where you registered the food facility and, enter in the port it's leaving, the estimated time of arrival, which you can just guess because, it's really hard to know, all the information. And this generates a document called a prior notice, and you get a prior notice number. Now, what I've learned is doing this, I'd rather not rely on a foreign company to file the prior notice for me, which is why I like to register the food facility or have access to this the food facility, at least their registration number or a copy of their registration, because you want to be doing the prior notice, because this is something that has to be done in a kind of limited time frame. Because what happens once you have the tracking number, you have to generate this prior notice number. And one thing I've learned is the FDA, or I guess customs, really likes that you put this prior notice number on the box. Like, write it on this box. So this prior notice number needs to be written on the box, but it has to be generated by the airway bill number, which is the tracking number. So you need someone down there that you can call and say, like, please let me know as soon as you have the tracking number, so you can generate the code, and then call them or send them an email and say, please, in big letters, write this on the box. And why do you write it on the box? This is not necessary, but what I've learned is by doing this, it increases the probability that it's going to get entered without being inspected or any unnecessary delays.
Gotcha. And that's really interesting. It sounds a lot like priority entry, which is basically just getting people in the priority entry is just a system that citizens of the United States and Canada have access to. And I'm not sure about Mexico, just full disclosure, but I do not believe so, which lets folks apply for a special kind of permit to skip lines when they're going through immigration and passing through customs in the United States. And that basically means that once you've applied for this and go through a small interview, you're able to get through really quickly. You show them something, the equivalent of showing them your prior notice number, and then you are not really inspected when you go through customs. It's a kind of it's a shortcut, perhaps.
Right on, Danny. Yeah, and so I think in summary, we wanted to give you guys, an exposure to these types of things that you're going to have to encounter, kind of like the technical FDA, importing logistics side, like these processes that you're going to have to go through to get your product launched. And, we're going to link to all this on the website to at least give you an overview of what you need to be doing. And we also want to call attention, especially to the food facility registration and the U.S. agent, that there is a huge opportunity there, I think, because, you have a lot of companies that, in my mind, for 30 minutes of work are charging very, very high fees, into thousands of dollars for something that can be done quite simply. So there's an opportunity for startups, or even spreading the awareness just to do it yourself, to help startups who are already on limited budgets and not having to spend such a high amount when they're tight on their budget.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, a lot of incubators that I've known and been involved with, they help out startups with a lot of accounting and in-house design and things like that. This is no different. Startups have a difficult path, and they need help, because when you're exporting and when you're working in food, a lot of times you start off in the red, not in the black. So, Matt, man, you've been a huge resource on this to all of our listeners, because it's hard to navigate this landscape. So, awesome.
Yeah, Danny, and, we think this is a very, maybe not the most exciting podcast, but a very informative podcast, and we hope this can be a resource, and we encourage, if you have any additional insights or any other questions, to visit us on our website at www.foodstartupspodcast.com.
Yeah, absolutely. Please share your stories with us, and looking forward to hearing from you guys soon. All the best.
Thanks so much for listening. And as always, if you have any questions or comments, find us online at foodstartupspodcast.com.